Have you ever wondered what would happen if a seemingly ordinary nursing assistant turned out to be a legendary sniper, facing off against a biker gang that terrorizes an entire town? In this riveting tale, Aria Fletcher, when saw in the been right around through solo onsist a Delta Force sharpshooter, steps out of her quiet life in North Carolina to protect her neighbors from the fearsome black vipers. Imagine furious shootouts in abandoned barns, heart-stopping rescues under moonlit skies, and a final standoff in a rundown roadhouse. These are just a few of the high-stakes moments that make this story impossible to pause. If you're intrigued by the action and want to discover how Arya saves her community from ruthless criminals, you won't want to miss a single chapter. Before we dive deeper, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more pulse-pounding stories, heroic tales, and thrilling twists. Stick around until the end to learn how justice prevails and to see how one courageous individual can change a town's destiny. A line of tall pine trees swayed gently along both sides of the narrow asphalt road leading into Kingsford, a modest town nestled near North Carolina's coastal plains. The summer sun shone brightly overhead, illuminating the quaint single-story houses and the occasional brick storefront. At first glance, Kingsford looked like one of those typical Southern communities where everybody knew everybody, and the biggest weekend excitement was a church bake sale or a high school football game. Its people prided themselves on tight-knit relationships and old-fashioned courtesy. Strangers passing through might have assumed there wasn't much to see or do here. Yet, hidden beneath the serene facade lay stories of resilience shaped by economic hardships, unexpected tragedies, and the strong spirit that united the residents. One of the older men in town, Mr. Emerson, spent most days rocking on his porch, greeting passersby with a friendly wave. Across the street, a well-worn diner called Leona's Place served fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet tea to local farmers and mechanics. The diner's windows rattled slightly every time a pickup truck rumbled past, carrying produce to nearby markets. Neighbors paused to catch up on small-town gossip, who just had a grandchild, what fishing hole was best this week, or when the next church gathering might be. Occasionally, a hush would fall over the patrons when a piece of more serious news surfaced, like the rumored presence of a rough motorcycle gang that had been spotted near the interstate. But those were just whispers, for now. Meanwhile, at the edge of town stood a humble white clapboard house surrounded by a short picket fence. In its backyard grew a robust vegetable garden, tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, meticulously cared for. This was the home of Aria Fletcher, known around Kingsford simply as that quiet nursing assistant. She worked at the local health clinic, often taking care of elderly patients who were short on money but rich in neighborly warmth. Aria was in her early 30s, with a patient smile and an unassuming demeanor that made her almost invisible in a crowd. She showed up to work on time, did her job diligently, then returned to her little house, rarely stopping to socialize. People accepted her reticence easily. After all, many of them preferred the peaceful routine of daily life and believed that staying out of each other's business was the polite thing to do. Yet, rumors floated around. Some folks said she had a military background. Others teased that she must have a strong body under that loose scrubs uniform because of how effortlessly she lifted boxes of medical supplies. But Aria never confirmed anything. She just offered a small, polite nod or a shrug whenever someone pried. What Kingsford didn't know, and what Aria hoped would remain a secret, was that the woman they saw as a mild-mannered caregiver was once Staff Sergeant Aria Fletcher of the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force. She had served in multiple covert operations overseas, performing feats only a handful of soldiers in the world could match. She was an expert sniper, trained to keep her eyes focused and her emotions controlled in the most harrowing of circumstances. But she had put all that behind her in search of a simpler, quieter life. Little did she suspect that her peaceful days would soon collide with a storm of violence and aggression, one that would force her to decide whether she could truly leave her past behind, or if she needed it now more than ever. Aria's day typically began before dawn. She rose at 5 a.m., did a quick series of stretches on her living room floor, and then brewed a cup of strong black coffee. She gazed through her kitchen window at the faint light touching the horizon, allowing herself a moment of calm before the day's demands set in. The house was modest, only 2 bedrooms, but it was enough for her. That morning, she pulled on her neatly folded scrubs and stepped outside to check the garden. Dew glistened on the tomatoes and peppers. She plucked a few ripe ones, wiping them gently with a rag before placing them in a small wooden crate on her porch. After a short drive, she arrived at the Kingsford Health Clinic, a single-story building with a faded sign that read, "Serving the Community Since 1954." The floors squeaked underfoot, and the ventilation was inconsistent at best, but the clinic was a lifeline for countless residents. Many of the patients were older folk who had worked hard all their lives and were now living on tight budgets. Aria's gentle manner and willingness to listen comforted them more than any medication. She had a knack for conversation. Though she spoke sparingly, the few words she did offer came with genuine warmth. That day, she found her usual routine quietly disrupted. The clinic's receptionist, Bethany, was flipping through newspapers at her desk, and the waiting room was buzzing with low murmurs. Aria picked up on an undercurrent of tension in the air. All that talk about a biker gang, had the rumors actually escalated? She inched closer to Bethany and caught a glimpse of a local newspaper headline, "Unidentified motorcycle gang spotted near county line." According to the brief article, residents had reported seeing large groups of bikers gathering at a rest stop off the interstate. Some mentioned intimidation tactics, although the details were vague. "Any official word on who these guys are?" Aria asked softly, aware that her question might draw unwanted interest from the patients in the waiting area. Bethany shook her head, her brow furrowed. "Not much. A few say they ride black Harleys with customized logos, something like a skull and crossbones. But no one around here seems to know them personally. The sheriff's department is looking into it, though." Aria nodded and glanced at the worried faces around her. The clinic's regular visitors, Mr. and Mrs. Collier, a friendly couple in their 70s, and a young mother with her toddler, looked visibly uneasy. In a small town like Kingsford, it took only a whiff of trouble to set everyone on edge. After checking on her morning patients, Aria found a quiet moment in the supply room to collect her thoughts. She closed her eyes, memories surging back, her breath stalling as the recollection of past operations overseas momentarily clouded her senses. She could almost smell the gun oil and taste the tension of hostile territory. Even though she had left all that behind, some part of her remained perpetually vigilant. She exhaled slowly, recalling the therapy sessions she'd attended after leaving the Army. The counselor had suggested she remember her training with respect, but also keep it compartmentalized. "Your past doesn't define you," the counselor said, "but it can guide you if ever you need it again." Aria hoped, perhaps naively, that she would never need it again in quiet Kingsford. The ominous headlines, however, made her suspect that peace might be more fragile than she'd imagined. By mid-afternoon, the hushed conversations around the clinic grew louder as more townspeople came in for checkups. An uneasy mood had settled like a storm cloud just beyond the horizon. Everyone seemed concerned about these unfamiliar bikers. Some speculated they were just passing through on their way to a larger city. Others feared they were the kind of group that took over territory and demanded obedience. Or worse. Aria completed her final patient evaluation of the day, quietly reassuring Mrs. Collier that her medication dosage was correct, and the mild headaches were likely stress-related. Yet the tension in her own shoulders hinted at her own unspoken worries. When she clocked out, she found a small group of nurses and doctors clustered in the break room, their faces reflecting concern. Dr. Rosenberg, the clinic's senior physician, addressed them in a calm but firm voice. "Listen, folks," he began. "I know the sheriff's office is telling everyone to stay vigilant. I just want to remind you all to take care of yourselves. These bikers might be nothing but troublemakers trying to scare folks. If you see something suspicious, report it. Don't try to handle it on your own." Bethany nodded vigorously. "I've been hearing from relatives in the next county that some stores there were vandalized late last night. Broken windows, stolen merchandise. The owners said they saw motorcycles speeding away. Could be unrelated, but it's still worrying." Aria felt a familiar tension coil in her stomach. She had long tried to distance herself from thoughts of conflict, from the reflexes and mindsets she had honed in the military. Part of her yearned to dismiss the rumors. Another part, trained to detect potential danger, was already forming questions. Where did these bikers come from? What was their aim? Had local law enforcement issued any official warnings? Her shift at the clinic ended and she walked out into the parking lot. The sun sat lower in the sky now, bathing the surroundings in a soft golden glow. The roads were relatively empty, typical for a weekday evening. She started her pickup truck and headed for the small supermarket in town to pick up a few groceries. As she parked and stepped out, she noticed a pair of unfamiliar motorcycles idling on the far side of the lot. Two men in leather vests stood nearby, smoking. They were tall, broad-shouldered, sporting tattoos that peeked out from under their sleeves. Their stares felt more aggressive than curious. Uncomfortable but determined not to appear rattled, Arya kept her gaze forward and moved into the store. She could almost sense the men's eyes following her. Her heart thudded in her chest in a way it hadn't in months. The practiced calm she had acquired in the army threatened to slip away. She forced herself to recall the breathing techniques that had once steadied her hands during high-pressure missions. Inhale, exhale, keep moving. After grabbing bread, milk, and a few other essentials, she approached the checkout, where the young cashier's hands trembled slightly. Arya glanced over her shoulder. Through the glass doors of the store, she saw one of the men outside flick his cigarette onto the ground and smirk. A sliver of unease traveled the length of her spine. Before, it had been easy to believe that her past life belonged in another world entirely. But the infiltration of these rough strangers made it clear. Sometimes trouble had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. Driving home felt like winding down after a tense firefight. Though nothing outwardly dramatic had happened, no shots fired, no overt threats hurled, the implication of danger was enough to unsettle Arya. She was used to reading body language, and the vibe from those bikers was not good. They seemed confident, like they owned the space they occupied, and their gaze promised no kindness. It reminded her of the war zones she had operated in, always scanning, always assessing who posed a threat. Her pickup rattled slightly as she turned onto the rural road leading to her little house. In the distance, farmland stretched across the horizon, and the setting sun's orange light painted the fields with a warm glow. She tried to appreciate the natural beauty, to find solace in the open space that had drawn her to Kingsford in the first place. Escaping the clamor of large cities and the intensity of her former career had been her primary goal after all. Pulling into her driveway, she noticed the neighbor's dog barking incessantly. Normally, the dog greeted her with friendly wags of its tail, but now it skulked near the fence, fur standing on end. Arya glanced around but saw nothing unusual. No shadowy figures, no unmarked vehicles. Still, a prickle of unease lingered in the air. She calmed the dog with a gentle pat on its head through the chain-link fence before unloading her groceries. Inside, she tried to focus on cooking dinner. Grilled chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, a quick salad. Yet the mundane routine felt oddly surreal, as if she were going through motions that no longer aligned with the undercurrent of threat in the back of her mind. She replayed the day's events, the overheard whispers, the news article, the unsettling encounter in the grocery store parking lot. It was all building towards something, she sensed. She finished her meal and cleaned up, determined to shrug off the tension. Arya had no intention of letting fear dictate her choices. She sat in the living room, flipping through channels on an old television set, but nothing captured her interest. Finally, she turned it off, letting silence reclaim the space. In that silence, her thoughts meandered to her old army buddies, some still actively deployed, others scattered across the country in new civilian roles. How many times had they joked about the day we can all relax? A gentle chirping broke her contemplation. She looked at her phone, a text from Dr. Rosenberg, a quick checkup message about how she was doing. He knew she was a private person, but he also knew she was an asset to the clinic, and he valued his team's well-being. Arya replied with a brief reassurance that she was fine and thanked him for the concern. Eventually, she found herself wandering into the small, spare bedroom she'd turned into a makeshift home office. A few boxes labeled military sat stacked in a corner, sealed with duct tape, untouched for over a year. Inside were medals, old uniforms, and a carefully disassembled rifle scope. She had sold or donated most of her gear, but some items held too much sentimental value to let go. She ran her fingertips across the top box, feeling a wave of nostalgia mixed with apprehension. Maybe there was no need to open it. Maybe a quiet life in Kingsford was still possible. But as day melted into night, she couldn't shake the conviction that the peace she'd found was on the verge of unraveling. The next morning, Kingsford awoke to a swirling rumor mill. Word spread that an elderly couple in a neighboring town had been harassed by a group of bikers who demanded money in exchange for protecting their property. Mr. Emerson, from his porch vantage point, overheard enough to shake his head in disgust. He confided in a passing mail carrier, who in turn shared the story with everyone on her route. Within hours, the entire town knew that these bikers weren't just passing through. They wanted something, and they weren't afraid to use intimidation. At the clinic, Aria listened quietly as each new patient brought fresh gossip. Mrs. Collier clutched Aria's hand, her eyes brimming with worry. "They're saying more of them keep arriving," the elderly woman whispered. "What do they want from a place like Kingsford? We don't have much here." Aria tried to muster a reassuring smile. "Probably just looking to stir up trouble," she said. "But don't worry too much, Mrs. Collier. We've got good folks in this town, and the sheriff will handle it." Those words rang hollow in her own ears, though. Aria knew from experience that law enforcement in rural areas often found themselves outnumbered or outgunned when facing organized criminal groups. She silently prayed the local authorities had the resources to respond effectively, yet she couldn't ignore the flutters of doubt gnawing at her. Later that afternoon, she took a short lunch break, stepping outside into the warm, humid air. The parking lot was nearly full, as if more people were flocking to the clinic for reassurance, if not medical care. Leaning against her truck, Aria took a few bites of a sandwich. She let her eyes wander, scanning the periphery for anything unusual, a habit from her old life, but one that comforted her now. She froze mid-bite when she spotted a dark motorcycle parked at the far end of the lot, near a cluster of oaks. A tall, leather-clad figure straddled the bike, helmet visor down, effectively hiding his face. Something about his posture told her he wasn't just there by coincidence. She felt his eyes on her. A moment later, he revved the engine and the bike thundered away, leaving only the acrid smell of exhaust behind. Aria exhaled slowly, her pulse racing. Was she being followed? Targeted? She forced a calm expression, not wanting to alarm any passers-by. If these bikers had singled her out somehow, she needed to be doubly cautious. Her instincts screamed to gather more information. But how? And what would she do if she discovered a genuine threat? Returning to the clinic, she found herself oddly detached, her mind drifting to possible defense strategies. She envisioned the layout of her home, the sturdy locks she'd installed. She recalled how to create improvised alarms, simple tripwire mechanisms that could warn of intruders. A twinge of guilt pinched her chest as she realized she was reverting to old habits, the ones she'd hoped to bury. But a sharper voice in her head retorted, "Better to be safe than sorry." By the time her shift ended, Aria resolved to keep her guard up. She drove home with eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a motorcycle tailing her. There was none. The drive back was silent and lonely, filled only with the distant hum of cicadas. Inside her house, she set down her keys and stood for a long moment in the dimly lit living room. Everything around her looked the same as always, but she knew that in reality, everything had changed. Days passed, and tension in Kingsford escalated with each new rumor of biker sightings. Small incidents started creeping into daily life. Windows were smashed at a hardware store. A farmer's barn was mysteriously torched. A mechanic reported theft of expensive tools. Though the incidents were scattered and unconfirmed to be linked to the bikers, the town's collective fear soared. One Friday evening, a local meeting was hastily organized in the town hall. The wood-paneled interior reverberated with anxious chatter. Dozens of residents packed into foldable chairs, some clutching homemade signs that read, "We want our town safe," and "No more gangs." Sheriff Tate, a stout man with a salt and pepper mustache, took the podium, clearing his throat before speaking. "I understand everyone's concerns," he said. "Our deputies are investigating recent events, and we're coordinating with nearby counties. We've increased patrols, especially along roads leading into Kingsford. All I ask is for you to remain vigilant and report anything suspicious. Let us do our job." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Collier's normally sweet voice trembled as she stood up, asking, "Sheriff, Is it true these bikers have already threatened families in the next county? Sheriff Tate hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it seems they've demanded payment for protection in a few instances. We're working on identifying their leaders and finding a legal avenue to shut them down before they get too bold. From her seat toward the back, Arya watched the tension unfold. A few citizens pleaded for more drastic measures, while others argued the sheriff's department lacked the manpower. Arya kept her head low, quietly absorbing the mood. Her old training told her that the bikers were likely trying to sow fear, to break the town's spirit before making a major move. The question was, how far would they go? After the meeting, people filed out slowly, still buzzing with concern. Arya slipped away from the crowd, hoping to avoid drawing attention. She didn't want to stand out or be cornered into offering her military expertise. Yet, as she stepped into the cool night air, she caught the silhouette of a man leaning against a lamppost. It was one of the bikers from the grocery store parking lot. She was almost certain. His face was partially hidden under a ball cap, but the stance was unmistakable. He eyed her briefly, then turned and melted into the darkness. Her heart pounded. This was more than a random coincidence. Were they tracking her movements, or was she just another face in the crowd? She needed information, and fast. She hurried to her truck, locked the doors, and drove straight home. Once inside, she stood in the kitchen, illuminated by a lone overhead light. Could she keep pretending to be a simple nursing assistant? If these bikers were systematically targeting the town, it wouldn't be long before they tried something bigger, maybe forcing local businesses to pay protection, or worse. Sleep was elusive that night. She tossed and turned, eyes darting to the window at every faint noise. Finally, around 3:00 a.m., she rose and entered the spare bedroom. Flipping on a small desk lamp, she knelt next to the stacked boxes. With a deep, steadying breath, she peeled back the duct tape on the top box. Inside were fragments of a life she hadn't touched for a long time. An old pair of combat boots, dog tags, a folded uniform, and a battered sniper scope. She closed her eyes, running her fingers across the cold metal. She might never return to being Staff Sergeant Fletcher. But maybe, just maybe, some of those skills could be put to use again to protect the only home she had now. The following morning, Arya made a decision she had been avoiding since the day she settled in Kingsford. Digging into the bottom of the box, she found a small, locked container. Inside lay a disassembled custom rifle scope and a journal containing coordinates, ballistic calculations, and tactical notes from her time in Delta Force. Each entry brought back a flood of memories. Long nights under desert skies, the press of the rifle's butt against her shoulder, the absolute stillness of the final breath before she took a shot. She carefully laid out the pieces on the spare bedroom desk, her hands moving with a confidence that contradicted the emotional turmoil within her. Reassembling the scope felt both haunting and reassuring. She wasn't going to wage a one-woman war, but she needed to prepare, just in case. Some might call it paranoia. She called it survival. With the scope reassembled, she stared through its lens, focusing on a nailhead in the wooden floor. It felt unsettlingly natural. The world that had once been her life, precision marksmanship, tactical maneuvers, flooded back with startling clarity. She remembered instructors telling her that the true skill never fades. It stays dormant, ready to reawaken when summoned. She told herself this was just a precaution. She had no intention of publicly confronting the bikers or revealing her past. Still, a weight had lifted from her chest, replaced by a readiness she couldn't fully explain. That afternoon, she drove to a secluded shooting range about 30 miles outside of town. Known mostly to hunting enthusiasts, it was run by an old Army veteran named Roy. She had spoken to him briefly in the past, but never disclosed her background. Arriving at the deserted range, she paid the small fee and set up a target at a long distance, well beyond what most local hunters would attempt. Roy ambled over, squinting at her setup. "You sure you want it that far? Usually folks start closer," he drawled. Arya nodded. "I like a challenge," she said, avoiding eye contact. She attached the scope to a rented hunting rifle, nowhere near as specialized as what she was used to, but it would do for practice. Taking a prone position, she inhaled, steadied her arms, and peered through the scope. The bullet's impact on the distant target was near perfect. Roy's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. genuinely impressed. Didn't know we had a sharpshooter in these parts. Arya offered a non-committal smile, saying nothing further. She went through a few more rounds, each shot grouping tightly around the bullseye. Each squeeze of the trigger felt like stepping back into an old skin, one she had once discarded, but now found herself slipping into once more. As she packed up, Roy approached quietly. "You ever served?" he asked, obviously curious. She paused, considering her response. "A while back," she admitted. "Figured." He nodded approvingly. No civilian picks up that kind of skill overnight. She left it at that. On the drive home, her thoughts raced. She'd confirmed she could still shoot straight. No surprise there. But what was her next move? If the bikers escalated their aggression, would she stand by and watch her community crumble? Or would she step into the fray, risking the anonymity and peace she'd fought so hard to secure? That question lingered like a heavy shadow, refusing to let her rest. As Sunday rolled around, the people of Kingsford tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Church bells chimed in the morning, and families gathered for potluck lunches. Yet the undercurrent of unease remained. Rieptao, who often volunteered at community events in a small capacity, attended a church fundraiser that afternoon. She found herself stationed at a table selling homemade pies, alongside Mrs. Collier and a few other residents. The fundraiser was meant to raise money for repairing the church roof damaged by a storm the previous month. A decent turnout filled the church lawn, with children running around, adults chatting in small clusters, and the aroma of fresh-baked goods filling the air. But Arya noticed that the conversation always drifted back to the same topic: the bikers. A group of teens whispered stories about seeing rows of motorcycles parked near an abandoned warehouse off Route 17. A few men in their 40s, local fishermen and farmers, spoke about forming a neighborhood watch, though it sounded more like they wanted to take matters into their own hands. Halfway through the event, two motorcycles roared past on the adjacent street, black exhaust fumes trailing in their wake. Heads turned, gazes followed. The riders did not stop, but their presence sparked fresh murmurs. Arya tried to keep her composure, handing change to a customer who'd bought a peach cobbler. However, she caught Mrs. Collier's worried glance. "They're trying to scare us. That's all," Arya said softly, hoping to calm the older woman. She forced a reassuring smile, but in her own mind she replayed the bikers' repeated appearances around town. She wondered if it was mere intimidation or reconnaissance, scoping out how the town might respond if pushed. When the fundraiser wrapped up, Arya helped load leftover pies into a car. She felt an uneasy tingling that made her glance around for signs of watchers, though she saw none. Eventually, she returned to her own vehicle, which was parked by the curb. Just as she slid into the driver's seat, she heard a startling knock on her window. She jumped, her instincts ready to kick into gear. Standing outside was a lanky young man in a faded baseball cap. She cracked the window an inch. "Yes?" "Sorry to startle you, ma'am," he said in a rushed tone. "You're Arya Fletcher, right? You work at the clinic?" She nodded, relaxing slightly. "I do." He glanced over his shoulder as if afraid of being followed. "Name's Travis. My grandma's a patient at the clinic, Mildred Park. She keeps talking about how kind you are." Arya recognized the name of an elderly patient who occasionally came in for blood pressure checks. "I remember her. What's this about, Travis?" Travis exhaled, leaning closer. "Look, I work part-time at the hardware store on the other side of town. Last night, a bunch of bikers came in right before closing. They didn't buy anything, just walked around, intimidating the few customers we had. My boss told me to just ring up any small items they grabbed, but they ended up not paying. They just left." Arya's chest tightened. "I'm sorry that happened, but why are you telling me?" He hesitated, then revealed a short, anxious laugh. "You can't tell anyone I said this, but my cousin's a deputy, and he said those bikers have a reputation for extortion. They're not just random punks. They're a gang called the Black Vipers. They'll start small, but eventually they'll demand the whole town cooperate. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do. I'm scared for my grandma, for all of us." Arya felt the gravity of his words sink in. "I understand," she said solemnly, "but the sheriff's department is on it." Travis nodded but looked unconvinced. "Yeah, well, if there's anything you can do, my grandma trusts you. We all do." He stepped away before she could respond, leaving her to grapple with the weight of an unspoken question. Could she do something? And if so, what? She watched him hurry off, a sense of responsibility stirring in her gut. The facade of her normal life was wearing thinner by the day. At dusk that same Sunday, Arya sat on her back porch, the chirping of crickets blending with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves. She sipped a cup of chamomile tea, trying to calm her mind. Thoughts of Travis's plea replayed incessantly. She had never sought the role of the town's protector, yet it appeared fate was nudging her in that direction. Her phone buzzed on the little wooden table beside her. The caller ID showed a blocked number. Frowning, she hesitated before answering. A female voice crackled through the line. Arya Fletcher? Arya's pulse quickened. Yes, who's this? It's Captain Evans, the woman replied. Arya's eyes widened. Captain Naomi Evans had been her superior officer in Delta Force, a tough but fair leader who had guided her through some of her most perilous missions. Captain, it's been a long time, Arya responded, forcing herself to sound composed. Indeed it has, Captain Evans said gently. I'm sorry for this unexpected call. I tried your old number, had to track you down through some channels. Arya's mind whirled. She'd left the army behind. What could her former captain possibly want now? I'm no longer active duty, Arya stated, not unkindly but firmly. I know, Evans replied. Believe me, I respect your retirement and your decision to lay low. But I came across some intel that might concern you. Word is a biker gang called the Black Vipers is moving through parts of the southeast. We've had run-ins with their affiliates during certain joint operations stateside. They're more dangerous than people think. Arya let out a shaky breath. They're in Kingsford, my town. So I've heard, Evans replied, her tone heavy with concern. Look, I'm not calling to rope you back into anything. I just wanted to give you a heads up. The Black Vipers have connections to bigger criminal networks. Gun running, drugs, you name it. Local police often underestimate them until it's too late. They're ruthless. A strange mix of relief and dread coursed through Arya. At least she wasn't alone in suspecting how serious this threat was. I appreciate the warning, Captain. Evans, the woman corrected, a hint of a small inner voice. I'm not your captain anymore, but if you need resources or if this escalates, let me know. You're not alone, Fletcher. The call ended. Arya stared at the phone, her thoughts a churn of old loyalties and new worries. She realized how unprepared Kingsford's small sheriff's department might be for a sophisticated gang. She also realized with a sinking certainty that ignoring her skills was no longer an option. If she truly wanted to protect her neighbors and friends, people like Mrs. Collier and Travis's grandmother, she might need to do more than just file a report or make a phone call. That night, she found herself in her bedroom, rummaging through her closet for a metal case she hadn't opened since settling in Kingsford. Opening the case, she confirmed it held extra gear, tactical gloves, a small ballistic vest, a sidearm disassembled for safe storage. Memories of covert missions in foreign lands rushed back, but she pushed them aside. She wasn't there to wage war, she reminded herself, but to defend if necessary. The distinction was razor thin, yet vital to her moral compass. As she closed the closet, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Gone was the timid nursing assistant facade. Staring back was a woman who, if pressed, was capable of extraordinary feats of precision and cunning. For better or worse, Staff Sergeant Arya Fletcher was awakening again. The next few days saw a subtle shift in the town's atmosphere. More patrol cars cruised the streets, their blue and red lights occasionally flickering in the twilight. Windows and doors sported newly installed locks, and hardware stores sold out of security cameras faster than they could restock them. Arya noticed her neighbors whispering in hushed tones. Some even formed small watch groups, taking turns standing guard near businesses after closing hours. The sense of community was strong, but so was the fear. In the midst of this heightened alert, Arya maintained her cover as best she could. She went to the clinic, cared for her patients, and offered words of reassurance. Yet once her shift ended, her evenings were spent meticulously preparing. She reviewed the town's layout, noting choke points, impossible vantage spots from which she could monitor large swaths of land. She even drove out to the abandoned warehouse off Route 17, staying far enough away to remain undetected, to see if the bikers had indeed set up a base of operations. Sure enough, she counted at least 7 motorcycles parked outside the rusty structure, their riders coming and going under the cover of darkness. The final straw came one afternoon at the clinic. It was a slow day, only a few patients trickling in. Suddenly, the double doors swung open, and 2 burly men in black leather vests strode inside. Their presence silenced the waiting room. Bethany, visibly nervous, asked if they needed medical assistance. They ignored her, scanning the small crowd as though searching for someone. Maybe for Arya, maybe not. One of them locked eyes with Arya for a brief moment, then smirked. Without a word, they turned and left, leaving a wave of tension in their wake. In the immediate aftermath, Dr. Rosenberg and Bethany rushed to ensure everyone was all right. One frightened woman burst into tears, and an elderly man shook with rage, cursing the bikers. Arya tried to remain calm on the outside, but she felt the burn of adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was no longer just rumor. It was an open show of intimidation, right in the heart of her workplace. That evening, Arya made her decision. She packed a small duffel bag with essential gear, her newly reassembled scope, the ballistic vest, and her sidearm. She placed the bag in the trunk of her pickup and set out. The sun was setting, bathing the horizon in shades of orange and pink as she drove toward the outskirts of town. Pulling off onto a dirt road near a sprawling cornfield, she parked and waited, the tension coiling in her belly. If the bikers continued their pattern, they might ride through this stretch of highway at night, returning to the warehouse. Arya intended to watch from a safe distance, to confirm their numbers and gauge their routine. She wasn't looking for a fight, only information. But her senses were on high alert, every rustle of wind through the corn stalks setting her nerves on edge. Night fell, and sure enough, she heard the low rumble of engines approaching. Through the faint moonlight, she counted at least 8 bikes roaring past on the road. Some riders bore the distinctive skull emblem she'd heard about. She watched them disappear into the distance, her jaw clenched in grim resolve. As she started up her truck, she knew that the next phase of this conflict was taking shape. The bikers were escalating, and so would she. For the people of Kingsford, for her own conscience, she could not remain idle any longer. The time for passive observation had ended. Her Delta Force instincts would soon be put to the ultimate test. Twilight settled over Kingsford, painting the sky in muted purples and grays. Arya parked her truck on the gravel shoulder of a lonely back road, engine ticking softly in the cool air. She'd spent the past hour circling the outskirts of town, mentally mapping the routes most likely used by the Black Vipers. Intuition told her they favored hidden roads to shuttle contraband, guns, drugs, or whatever else they trafficked. If their operation was more extensive than a few random acts of vandalism, they'd need a steady supply chain. The crickets chirped in the tall grass as she quietly exited the vehicle. She had on lightweight tactical pants and a dark hoodie, blending into the shadows. She retrieved a small pair of binoculars from her duffel bag. Leaning against the hood, she scanned the horizon. A moonbeam caught the distant reflection of metal, possibly a motorcycle parked near a rundown barn. She made a mental note of the location, a small knot forming in her stomach at the thought of more criminals setting up shop. Remembering her conversation with Captain Evans, she felt both comforted and unsettled. The Army might be able to offer support, but pulling them in would invite questions and publicity. She wanted no part in that. Still, Evans's warning had reinforced Arya's worst suspicions. These bikers were not a ragtag group. They had structure and backing from a larger network, making them a formidable threat to small-town law enforcement. A sudden rumble interrupted her thoughts. 2 motorcycles roared down the road, their headlights slicing the darkness. Arya ducked behind her truck, heart pounding. The riders passed without slowing, but their presence reminded her she was treading a dangerous line between reconnaissance and direct engagement. After a few more minutes of observation, Arya decided to leave. She had no intention of starting a firefight alone out here. Instead, she returned to town and drove straight to the Kingsford Sheriff's Office. A single light glowed inside the small, brick building. The night shift deputy, a young man named Garcia, looked up in surprise when she walked in. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, noticing the tension in her posture. Arya offered a polite nod. "I have some information about the bikers I'd like to share with Sheriff Tate, if he's here." Garcia frowned. "He just left for the night, but I can call him back in if it's urgent." She hesitated. The sheriff was a good man, but she wasn't sure how much he'd trust her intelligence. Still, time was running short. It's about where they might be storing contraband. I've seen them near the old barn on Elkhorn Road. Might be worth checking out. All right, Garcia said, jotting down notes. I'll pass this on to the sheriff as soon as possible. Aria gave her thanks and turned to leave. The pressure in her chest only tightened. She wasn't sure if the sheriff's department could handle the situation. They were likely outgunned and outnumbered, not to mention lacking the tactical training needed for a large-scale confrontation. Driving home, she mulled over her options. With each passing day, the bikers seemed bolder, testing the town's reactions. She imagined them planning a major strike, maybe forcing businesses to pay protection fees or targeting a high-value location. She needed to stay one step ahead. The question was whether she could do it alone and how to keep her identity as a former Delta Force sniper under wraps. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the clock on the dashboard read 2:14 a.m. The house lay silent and dark. As she entered, she locked the door behind her, checking each window before heading to bed. She sensed that the real battle for Kingsford had only just begun, and she wasn't entirely sure she'd escape without revealing who she truly was. Morning came with a haze of fatigue. Aria was up by 6, pressing a steaming mug of coffee to her lips as she stood on her porch, scanning the horizon. Life in Kingsford carried on. A school bus rumbled down the street, and a neighbor walked his golden retriever. It was all so ordinary that it almost made Aria question the seriousness of the looming threat. But she'd learned to trust her gut. The town's tranquility now felt more like a stage set before the storm. At the clinic, she found Dr. Rosenberg in the break room, flipping through a stack of medical charts. His normally calm face looked strained. "Morning, Aria," he greeted, his tone subdued. "Heard more stories about the bikers last night. Someone vandalized the gas station sign on Route 9. Profanity, threats, they're marking their territory." Aria set her coffee down, tension etching her brow. "Any leads on who might be behind it?" He shrugged. "Sheriff Tate's investigating, but it's the same old story. No witnesses, cameras conveniently out of order." Folding his arms, he sighed. "I just hope nobody gets hurt. This community doesn't deserve that." She nodded, keeping her own apprehensions to herself. The day passed uneventfully, checking vitals, administering flu shots, and comforting anxious patients who whispered about the latest sightings of menacing Harley-Davidsons. Aria couldn't help but notice the growing number of canceled appointments. Some residents were too scared to leave their homes. Late in the afternoon, when patient flow slowed, Rosenberg asked her to join him in his cramped office. The walls were lined with medical references, and the room smelled faintly of antiseptic. "You've been quiet about this whole biker situation," he began, studying her face. "But I sense you're more prepared than most of us. Are you ex-military?" The question jolted her. She'd known Dr. Rosenberg for a while, but had never given him a full glimpse of her past. Still, she couldn't outright lie. "Yes," she said carefully. "Army." He nodded as though he'd suspected as much. "You must have skills then. Skills that could help. I'm not asking you to break the law or anything, but these bikers—" He hesitated, choosing his words. "If they escalate, the town might need every bit of help it can get." Aria swallowed, her throat dry. "I'm not looking for a fight, Doc, but I won't stand by if innocent people are at risk." She took a breath, trying to rein in the swirl of emotion. "I just hope the sheriff can handle it." He gave her a tight smile. "Let's hope so, but Aria, don't be afraid to step up if the time comes." She left the office with renewed gravity. Word was spreading that she had some sort of military background. Perhaps it was inevitable in a small town. Secrets rarely stayed buried. The question now was how far she was willing to go. She had sworn she'd never return to the sniper's life. Then again, she had also sworn to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That evening, she found a note slipped under her windshield wiper as she left the clinic parking lot. The paper bore a hastily scrawled message. "We're watching. Stay out of our way." No name, no signature, just a crude drawing of a skull beneath the words. Her blood ran cold. Either the bikers had singled her out for some reason, or they were sending a generic threat to anyone who opposed them. She crushed the note in her fist and glanced around the lot, but there was no sign of anyone lurking. The message, however, was clear. This was personal now, and Arya realized that playing it safe was no longer an option. Arya spent a sleepless night pacing the small confines of her living room. The menacing note looped through her thoughts, fueling a simmering anger she'd tried to keep buried. She had seen plenty of intimidation tactics overseas, from rogue militias to warlords, but she never imagined facing a similar threat in suburban North Carolina. At dawn, she stepped outside, inhaling the crisp morning air in an attempt to clear her mind. The idea of facing a criminal organization alone was daunting, but her conscience refused to let her stay idle. She decided to gather additional intel, this time more than just recon. She needed to understand the bikers' chain of command, the scope of their operation, and possible allies they might have in or around Kingsford. Before work, she drove to a nearby diner, a small place frequented by truckers and travelers. The coffee was decent, and gossip flowed freely. Sitting in a corner booth, she overheard snippets of conversation from the next table, two men discussing the recent vandalism in hushed tones. "Think they'll come here next?" one man asked. His friend shrugged, stirring his coffee. "Heard from a buddy in law enforcement that these Black Vipers answer to somebody called Stone. Not a guy you want to mess with, runs a bigger outfit across state lines." Arya pretended to scroll on her phone, but her ears perked. Stone. She committed the name to memory. If Stone was the ringleader, then removing him from the equation might destabilize the entire local operation. But how to find him and how to ensure the rest of the gang scattered afterward? She filed the thought away for later. Over the next couple of hours, she visited a few more public spots: the hardware store, the grocery, another diner across town. Each stop, she discreetly listened, gleaning what she could. She learned that the bikers had recently threatened a local gas station manager, demanding a weekly payout to keep the pumps safe. They weren't shy about brandishing knives or implying they had guns. By the time she arrived at the clinic for her shift, Arya had painted a clearer picture of the gang's methods: intimidation, small-scale property damage, and extortion. If their success continued unchecked, they'd soon escalate, possibly resorting to violence. She suspected their next move might be more aggressive, something to truly terrify the town into compliance. During her lunch break, she retreated to a secluded outdoor bench behind the clinic and made a call. The phone rang twice before Captain Evans picked up. "Fletcher?" the familiar voice answered. "It's me," Arya confirmed quietly. "I need a favor. I'm dealing with a gang called the Black Vipers. Their rumored leader is a man named Stone. Does that ring any bells?" Evans paused. "Yes, actually. Stone's real name is believed to be James Stonewall. He's ex-military, dishonorably discharged. Runs his operation like a paramilitary group. We've intercepted intel on him before, but he slips through the cracks." Arya's heart sank. An ex-military leader meant Stone had strategic training. "Any advice?" she asked. "Local law enforcement is your first line, but I doubt they can handle Stone's level of organization," Evans said gravely. "You know what you're capable of, Fletcher. Just be careful. If you need backup, call me. I can't offer official support, but I have connections." The conversation ended with no easy solutions. Arya knew the path ahead demanded both caution and resolve. She had chosen Kingsford for its peaceful obscurity, but fate had other plans. One thing was certain: she wouldn't let the Black Vipers claim her town without a fight. Later that afternoon, Arya found herself standing on the clinic's rear loading dock, taking a moment to reflect on everything she'd learned. The old shipping area behind the building served as a quiet haven where employees sometimes came to smoke or escape the chaos of a busy day. Arya scanned the perimeter, ensuring she was alone. She couldn't ignore the nagging sense of responsibility growing inside her. Suddenly, in other conflicts, the army had provided a chain of command, a structured system of authority. Here, in Kingsford, she was on her own. No official orders, no backup squads. The only chain of command seemed to be her moral compass. The local sheriff's office, understaffed and under-equipped, might not stand a chance against Stone and his gang. Pulling out her phone, she scrolled through her contacts. Most were clinic staff or acquaintances from town. Then there were old army pals, a few numbers she still had memorized, though she rarely reached out. Memories of nights spent behind enemy lines with her unit flashed through her mind. The camaraderie, the sense of unity. Could she call upon those connections now? She shook off the idea. Involving old comrades would not only expose them to potential harm, but it might also risk turning Kingsford into a battleground. Arya resolved to handle this quietly, if possible. Her first priority was preventing any more harm to the innocents around her. As she re-entered the clinic, Bethany approached with a troubled look. Arya, there's a phone call for you at the reception desk. The person wouldn't give a name, but they specifically asked for you. Arya's pulse quickened. Thanks, Bethany. I'll take it in Dr. Rosenberg's office. In the small, cluttered office, she picked up the receiver. This is Arya. A low, gravelly voice came through. Don't think we don't know who you are, Miss Fletcher. Her stomach dropped. The fact that they had her last name confirmed her suspicions. The Black Vipers had done their homework. Or should I say, Sergeant Fletcher, the voice continued, a taunting edge creeping in. We've got friends in interesting places, you know. We hear stories about your little escapades overseas. Arya gripped the phone, her mind racing. How deeply had they dug into her past? What do you want? She asked quietly. A sinister chuckle crackled on the line. We want what we always want, control. And you're starting to become a thorn in our side. Back off, or there'll be consequences. For you, for that old doc you work with, for the sweet folks in this little town. Understood? Before she could respond, the line went dead. She replaced the receiver gently, her heart hammering in her chest. They knew. They knew enough, at least, to threaten her explicitly. The call only solidified her resolve. If she stepped aside, the entire town would pay the price. But if she fought back, she risked exposing her lethal skill set to everyone around her and putting a target on her own back. Everything okay? Bethany's concerned voice came from the doorway. Arya forced a tight-lipped smile. Wrong number, she lied, brushing past her coworker. Inside, her thoughts churned. Stone's gang was connected, organized, and unafraid to push boundaries. She had a choice: yield to their threats or leverage every ounce of her training to protect the people who had come to trust her. She knew the path she would choose. She just hoped she could live with the consequences. In the quiet hours that followed, Arya methodically formed a plan, covert but as precise as any mission she'd undertaken in the army. She knew she couldn't confront the Black Vipers head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, she'd weaken their hold by undermining their operations step by step. To do so, she needed intelligence. Specifically, she had to confirm the locations where they stashed illegal goods or held secret meetings. The barn on Elkhorn Road was one site, and the abandoned warehouse off Route 17 was another. Word around town hinted at a possible third site, a roadhouse called the Rusted Spur, a derelict bar just outside Kingsford's county limits. The bar had been shut down for months due to health violations, yet multiple locals reported seeing motorcycles parked there late at night. Arya spent the rest of her shift at the clinic in a haze, going through the motions of caring for patients while mentally cataloging her resources. A small drone she'd purchased for recreational use, her old sniper scope, plus night vision goggles she had stored away. She also remembered a local electronics repair shop where she might procure security cameras on short notice. If she could install them discreetly near key locations, she'd gather video evidence of the gang's activities, evidence that could be handed over to Sheriff Tate or used to negotiate if necessary. After clocking out, she drove to a nearby strip mall where the electronics shop was located. Its neon open sign flickered in the dusk. She entered, scanning the aisles for a camera system that would be easy to hide. Finding a suitable model, she approached the counter. A bored-looking teenager wearing a name tag that read Mason raised his eyebrows at the sight of her gear. "You sure you want these?" he asked, curious. "They're mostly used for hunting or wildlife observation. They record in infrared." "Exactly what I need," Arya said, forcing a friendly tone. "We've had some vandals around my neighborhood." "Gotcha. Well, if you need any help setting them up, let me know." He seemed pleased to share his expertise, explaining how to sync the cameras to a phone app for live feeds. Arya left the store with a sense of renewed purpose. Step 1, gather intel. Step 2, disrupt the gang's supply lines. Step 3, isolate their leadership, Stone in particular. It was ambitious, but with careful planning, she believed it could work. As night fell, she made her first move. She parked her truck a safe distance from the barn on Elkhorn Road, then killed the lights. Grabbing the cameras, her sidearm, and a slim toolkit, she slipped into the darkness. The moon was a mere sliver, providing just enough light to navigate without attracting attention. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she inched along the barn's perimeter. The old wooden structure loomed like a hulking silhouette against the night sky. She heard faint voices from inside, laughter, cursing, the clink of glass bottles. Carefully, she positioned two cameras, one overlooking the main entrance, another covering a side window. She angled them to avoid immediate detection, hiding them among the overgrown weeds in a stack of rotting wooden crates. With that done, she retreated to her truck, heart racing. A part of her worried she'd lost her edge. What if she'd left footprints or made noise, femme? But her military training soothed her. Slow your breathing, minimize your profile, blend in. She started the engine, headlights still off, and rolled away quietly. Back at home, she tested the camera feed, relief washing over her when clear, albeit grainy, images appeared on her phone screen. She set the device to record continuously. Tomorrow, if the cameras weren't discovered, she'd have her first glimpse into the gang's movements. It was a small step, but in a battle like this, every advantage mattered. She double-checked all her locks and climbed into bed, adrenaline making sleep elusive. As she closed her eyes, she couldn't help but picture Stone's face. An unknown phantom for now, but one she was determined to expose. The cost of failure weighed heavily on her, yet she felt an undeniable stir of purpose. For the first time in a long while, Staff Sergeant Aria Fletcher was fully engaged in a mission. This time, the battlefield was her hometown. Aria woke before dawn, her mind already buzzing with thoughts of the surveillance she had set up the night before. She checked the camera feed on her phone the moment she opened her eyes. The grainy display revealed an empty barnyard at first, until movement caught her attention. Around 2 o'clock a.m., 3 bikers had arrived. She watched them wander in and out of the barn, sometimes carrying small packages that looked suspiciously like they could contain drugs or weapons. By 3:15 a.m. they left, their engines rumbling off into the distance. It was enough to confirm that the barn served as some kind of storage or handoff point. She saved the footage, labeling it with a date and timestamp. This was tangible evidence, proof that the Black Vipers were conducting illegal activities on local property. But was it enough to spur Sheriff Tate into action? After a quick shower, she dressed and headed to the clinic. As she pulled into the parking lot, a deputy's cruiser caught her eye. Deputy Garcia, the same young man who had spoken to her at the station, was leaning against his patrol car, scanning the premises. When he noticed Aria, he offered a nod. "Morning, Miss Fletcher," he greeted as she walked up. "Sheriff got your tip about the barn on Elkhorn. We're keeping a closer watch out that way." Aria tried to read his face, but his expression remained neutral. "Any leads?" she asked softly. Garcia shrugged. "Not much. Our resources are stretched thin. Sheriff Tate plans to check it out, but we have to tread carefully. We can't just bust in with a probable cause or a warrant. We'd need solid evidence." She hesitated, deliberating whether to reveal the footage she'd collected, but doing so might raise questions about her methods. Instead, she merely nodded. "I understand. I hope you find what you need." Inside the clinic, she set about her usual tasks. The morning passed in a blur of routine checkups and medical forms, though she couldn't fully concentrate. While administering a flu shot to an elderly patient, she found her thoughts drifting to the camera feed. Whether the devices remained undetected, whether the bikers planned a larger shipment. By lunchtime, she retreated to the break room, only to find Dr. Rosenberg pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. He hung up, exhaling sharply. "Problem?" Aria asked, taking a seat. That was Bethany. She stepped out to grab lunch and ran into a few bikers in the parking lot. They didn't harm her, but one of them made a crude comment and mentioned your name. She's shaken up. Aria's jaw tightened. They were sending a message, inching closer to her circle. First the phone call, now confronting her colleague. This was their way of letting her know she wasn't untouchable. Dr. Rosenberg frowned. "Look, Aria, I don't mean to pry, but I feel like we're all in the dark here. If there's something you know that could help keep this place safe." Aria forced a reassuring smile. "We just need to stay vigilant. I'm doing what I can." The doctor didn't press further, but a worried look lingered on his face as he left. Arya felt the weight of his unspoken plea. The clinic staff and patients were depending on her, whether they realized it or not. She returned to her station, her determination hardening into resolve. She might not have a formal command structure or a platoon at her side, but she possessed an advantage Stone likely underestimated, a special operative's cunning, and a willingness to fight for the people she cared about. The question now was how far she'd have to go to end this threat once and for all. That evening, Arya drove home under a sky-bruised purple by the setting sun. Instead of going straight inside, she unlocked the gate to her backyard and stepped into the garden. The smell of tomato vines and freshly turned earth brought a small sense of comfort, a reminder of the simpler life she'd tried to build. Her phone buzzed just as she started checking the plants for ripe produce. A text message from an unknown number read, "We see you." A chill ran down her spine. She looked around, scanning neighboring yards and the darkening street beyond her fence. No sign of anyone lurking. Still, she hurried inside, double-locking the door. Once her nerves settled, she powered on her laptop to review the surveillance footage. The barn remained active after midnight, but the real surprise came around 4 a.m. A single SUV pulled up, lights off. Two men stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a limp. They opened the barn doors, moved something heavy into the back of the vehicle, and then drove off. Arya replayed the clip multiple times, squinting to catch any identifying details. No license plates were visible, but the taller man wore a distinctive patch on his leather vest, a stylized viper's head with red eyes. This was definitely no random meeting. It looked like a higher-level exchange, possibly one of Stone's lieutenants. She copied the footage onto an external drive. This was too big for her to handle alone, but she also couldn't trust the sheriff's office to move quickly enough. Still, she had to try. Evidence like this could justify a warrant to search the barn. The next morning, she woke at dawn, hammered by indecision. She needed backup, or at least someone to watch her six. For a moment, she considered calling Captain Evans again. But the last thing she wanted was to drag her former commander into a local conflict. Another option was Roy, the old Army veteran who ran the shooting range. He had enough sense and skill to handle a weapon if things turned dire. Still, trusting people with her secret was risky. She didn't relish the idea of others discovering her Delta Force history, but it might be the only path forward. By 7 a.m., she'd made her choice. A half-hour drive later, she pulled into Roy's shooting range. The place was empty this early, the morning sun reflecting off dew-streaked tables and targets. Roy, in faded jeans and a military ball cap, stood near the entrance, checking inventory. He glanced up surprised. "Well, hey there, not often you see folks this early." She forced a smile. "Got something I need to discuss. Privately." Roy narrowed his eyes, looking her up and down. "Sounds serious. Follow me." He led her to a small, cluttered office. A dusty American flag and a black and white POWMIA poster hung on the wall. Once the door closed, Arya pulled out the external drive. "I have footage of illegal activity, a biker gang smuggling something at a barn in town. The sheriff's department is short-staffed. I need help making sure this gets handled right." Roy leaned back in his chair, tapping a scarred knuckle on the desk. "You want me to talk to the sheriff with you?" "Potentially, but also, I might need another set of eyes if things go bad. I know you have experience." He studied her silently for a few heartbeats. "You were military. I could see that in your stance. What's your specialty?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was the only way. "Sniper. Delta Force." Roy let out a low whistle. "Well, damn, that explains your aim." Arya nodded, finally feeling some relief at laying her cards on the table. "Are you in or out?" Roy's eyes hardened with resolve. "I'm in. Let's put an end to these punks once and for all." Later that same day, Arya and Roy headed to the sheriff's office with the external drive in hand. An air of grim determination hovered between them. Neither spoke much during the drive. They both understood the stakes were high. If Stone and his lieutenants caught wind of this meeting, there would be retaliation. Upon arriving, they found Sheriff Tate hunched over a desk piled with reports. Deep lines of fatigue etched across his face. He looked up wearily as they entered. "Fletcher, right?" he said, eyeing Roy warily. "And?" "Roy," the older man offered a curt nod. "I run the shooting range outside town. Arya stepped forward, holding up the drive. Sheriff, I have video evidence of the Black Vipers conducting illegal activities at the barn on Elkhorn Road. Packages being moved in and out. I think this could be enough for a warrant. Tate flicked a glance at a deputy in the corner. Close the door. After the deputy complied, the sheriff leaned in. Show me. They found an empty interrogation room where Arya booted up a computer, inserting the drive. The footage played, clearly showing the bikers transferring items from the barn to an SUV under the cover of night. Sheriff Tate watched intently, eyebrows knitted. When the video ended, he sighed, running a hand over his stubble. This is good, real good. Exactly what we need to get probable cause. We can raid that barn. Roy folded his arms. We'll need a solid plan. These guys won't hesitate to fight back. Sheriff Tate nodded. Agreed. I'll gather my deputies and coordinate with the county SWAT team. Maybe we can do this tomorrow night. Arya felt a pulse of relief. Finally some progress. But her caution flared. Stone will suspect something if we wait too long, she warned. He has informants. By tomorrow, that place could be empty. Tate exhaled. I understand, but my men aren't prepared for an immediate assault. I need at least a day to mobilize properly. Arya's jaw tightened. She knew how quickly criminals could vanish once they sniffed out danger. Still, they needed the tactical advantage. Barging in without adequate backup was a death sentence. All right, she conceded. But keep this under wraps. If word leaks, it's all for nothing. The sheriff nodded gravely. Only my most trusted deputies will know. In the meantime, you two should lay low. We'll contact you if we need more intel. Leaving the station, Arya's mind buzzed with potential scenarios. They'd either catch the gang off guard or the Vipers would be tipped off and vanish. In the worst case, the Vipers might violently retaliate, turning the raid into a bloodbath. She shuddered at the thought of innocents getting caught in the crossfire. As she and Roy walked back to her truck, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did your part, kid. Let the law handle the rest. She mustered a faint smile. Thanks, Roy. I appreciate your help. He shrugged. Look, I've seen my share of conflicts. Didn't expect another one on my doorstep, but here we are. Just promise me you won't do anything rash. Arya nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she could keep that promise. Her protective instincts ran deep, and if the raid went sideways, she might have no choice but to intervene. For now, she'd trust Sheriff Tate to do his job. That night, as darkness settled over Kingsford, Arya sat in her living room, disassembling and cleaning the old rifle scope she'd kept. Her hands moved with methodical precision, muscle memory from years of special operations. She wasn't seeking a fight, but if one came, she intended to be ready. The tension in the air felt suffocating. Tomorrow, everything could change. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. The sun rose on Kingsford with a deceptive calm. Arya went through her morning routine on autopilot. Coffee, a quick breakfast, and then a drive to the clinic. She had decided to keep her normal schedule to avoid drawing suspicion. The upcoming raid on the barn was supposed to happen under the cover of darkness, giving law enforcement time to finalize their strategy. By midday, tension coiled in her chest, making it hard to focus on patient charts. She checked her phone repeatedly, half expecting a call from Sheriff Tate with news of a change in plans. But the device stayed silent. When her lunch break finally rolled around, she slipped outside to the clinic's rear parking lot for fresh air. The day felt unusually warm, the sun beating down on the cracked asphalt. She leaned against her truck, scanning for anything out of place. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from behind a dumpster. Travis, the young man who'd first tipped her off about the bikers at the hardware store. He looked spooked, sweat beading on his forehead. Miss Fletcher, he whispered, glancing nervously around the lot. I'm glad I found you. You gotta help. Arya's heart sank. Slow down, Travis. What's going on? It's my cousin, Travis said, voice trembling. The deputy. He got jumped last night by some bikers. They roughed him up real bad, threatened to kill his family if he didn't leak intel about the sheriff's plans. He's in the hospital now, too scared to talk. Arya's blood ran cold. Did he say if he told them anything? Travis bit his lip, eyes darting left and right. He claimed he didn't know much. But I don't know. They're terrifying. They got ways of making you talk, you know? It was exactly the nightmare scenario Arya had feared. The Vipers suspected a police operation. If they managed to force crucial details out of the deputy, tonight's raid would be compromised. Stay calm, Arya said, though her own pulse thundered. Go back to the hospital and stay with your cousin. Don't let anyone suspicious near him. I'll handle this. Travis nodded and hurried off. Arya stared at the empty spot where he'd stood, mind racing. The sheriff needed to know immediately. She jumped into her truck and dialed the station. After a few rings, a frazzled-sounding receptionist answered, claiming the sheriff was out on a call and unreachable. Time was running out. If Stone learned the specific time and place of the raid, he'd move his contraband or set a trap. Either way, innocent lives could be lost. Arya started her engine and sped toward Roy's shooting range, her mind made up. If the official operation was compromised, she'd have to act outside the lines. She needed someone who could watch her back, and Roy was the best candidate. She'd attempt one last covert stakeout to confirm if the barn was already being cleared out. If so, she'd tip off the sheriff's team to relocate. If the barn remained active, maybe they still had a chance at a surprise raid. Her tires kicked up a cloud of dust as she pulled into Roy's lot. He was already outside, polishing a rifle with a solemn expression. The moment he saw her face, he set it aside. "What happened?" he asked, voice tense. "We've got trouble. The Vipers might know about tonight's raid. We need to move fast," she replied. Roy rose, cracking his knuckles. "Then let's gear up, soldier. Looks like we're going in." Within minutes, Roy and Arya were in his small office, poring over a county map spread across an old wooden desk. Roy traced a calloused finger along rural routes and back roads. "If they're tipped off, Stone might relocate his stash to another site," he said gravely. Arya nodded. "Agreed. The warehouse on Route 17 is a prime candidate. We also heard rumors about the Rusted Spur Roadhouse. It's abandoned, which makes it ideal for a quick switch." Roy tapped the map. "Let's start at the barn. See if there's any sign of movement. If it's quiet, we proceed to the next location. But we've got to be smart about this. We can't just roll in, guns blazing." Arya appreciated his level-headed approach. "If we confirm the barn is being cleared out, I'll call Sheriff Tate, assuming we can reach him. He can redirect his men accordingly." Roy opened a metal cabinet and retrieved 2 compact rifles. He handed one to Arya, arching an eyebrow. "You still remember how to handle one of these?" She took it, running a quick safety check like it was second nature. "Better than I remember birthdays, Roy." He chuckled grimly. "That's what I figured." They loaded their gear into Arya's pickup, rifles, extra magazines, and a pair of night vision goggles. Arya also brought along the small drone she had purchased months ago. With the raid potentially compromised, an aerial view might be their best shot at spotting the bikers without drawing attention. The sun dipped toward the horizon as they drove out of Kingsford, tension thick in the cab. Arya kept one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally fumbling with the phone, hoping for an update from Sheriff Tate. Nothing came. Outside the barn, they parked behind a stand of tall pines. The structure looked eerily silent under the orange glow of the setting sun. Arya killed the engine and they got out, crouching low as they approached. Through binoculars, she saw no guards, no sign of vehicles. Roy looked uneasy. "This place was active as of last night. Looks like they've already pulled out." Fearing as much, Arya set the drone down on a patch of grass, syncing it to her phone. With a whir, it lifted into the sky, its camera feeds streaming live. She steered it around the barn's perimeter, capturing angles the naked eye couldn't see. Empty. No bikes, no trucks, and from the drone's thermal imaging, no sign of warm bodies inside. "They're gone," she muttered, her chest tightening. Roy let out a slow exhale. "Then the sheriff's raid is worthless if they hit this location tonight." Arya nodded, recalling her earlier conversation with Travis. "We need to check the warehouse on Route 17 next. If they've moved everything there, we can still warn Tate." They quickly retrieved the drone and hurried back to the truck. The sun was a mere sliver on the horizon now, bathing everything in a blood-red hue. Arya couldn't shake the dread creeping over her. If Stone had truly prepared a trap, every minute counted. As they drove toward Route 17, her phone finally buzzed. She snatched it up, pressing it to her ear. The line was full of static, but she recognized Sheriff Tate's voice shouting something about the barn and no one's there. Then a loud pop resounded. Gunfire? Followed by frantic yelling before the call abruptly ended. Arya's hands went ice cold. She looked at Roy, her eyes wide. They already started the raid, and it sounds like it's gone bad. Roy slammed a fist on the dashboard. God help him. Arya swallowed hard, adrenaline surging. The fight she'd hoped to avoid was now a grim reality. We have to help, she whispered, spinning the wheel toward the old barn. We're out of time. Arya's foot pressed the accelerator as she and Roy sped toward the barn, a storm of anxiety and adrenaline fueling her. The radio broadcast from Sheriff Tate had ended abruptly with the chilling echo of gunfire. If Stone's men had anticipated the raid, the deputies would be lucky to escape with their lives. Step on it, Roy muttered, gripping the dashboard. The sky had faded to deep purple, night looming just beyond the treetops. Arya's truck bounced over potholes, headlights illuminating clouds of dust and gravel. Within minutes, the barn's silhouette came into view against a smoldering dusk. The area was lit by the rotating red and blue strobes of 2 squad cars, their doors left wide open. A bullet-riddled third cruiser lay on its side near the barn's entrance. Flickers of muzzle flashes erupted from the barn's open door, answering the occasional staccato pop of a deputy's sidearm. Arya parked behind a stand of trees, cutting the engine. She and Roy grabbed their rifles, slipping out of the truck. Stay low, she whispered, though Roy hardly needed the reminder. Together they edged toward the barn, keeping to the long shadows. Her heart thundered as she spied a deputy crouched behind an overturned tractor. The man was bleeding from a gash across his forehead, eyes wild with panic. He spotted Arya and Roy, relief flickering over his features. Thank God, he gasped. They ambushed us. Sheriff Tate is pinned inside with a couple of my colleagues. Arya signaled for the deputy to stay put. She and Roy exchanged a grim look, each understanding what needed to be done. If Tate and his men were still alive, they'd be counting on outside help. Roy tapped Arya's shoulder. I'll circle around, see if I can get a vantage from the hayloft window. Arya nodded. I'll move in closer, draw their fire. With practiced efficiency, she fitted a small flashlight to her rifle, setting it to strobe mode. In the gloom, that blinking light would disorient anyone aiming at her. Roy slipped into the darkness, heading for the barn's far side. Arya waited a beat, centering her breathing. You've done this before. Stay focused. The memory of past firefights rose unbidden, but she tamped it down, forcing herself to remain calm. On her signal, she emerged from behind the tractor and sprinted to a rusted pickup parked halfway between her and the barn. Gunfire erupted from inside the structure, bullets pinging against metal. She flattened herself against the truck's chassis, her pulse roaring in her ears. Carefully, she risked a glance over the hood. 4 bikers had entrenched themselves in the barn's entrance, hiding behind hay bales and wooden crates. Their silhouettes jittered under the flicker of a hanging bulb. One of them carried a shotgun, another brandished a high-powered rifle. Arya guessed the other 2 had sidearms. She leveled her rifle, exhaled, and fired 2 precise shots at the men's cover, forcing them to duck. A moment later, Roy's rifle barked from behind, bullets strafing the barn's upper rafters and sending fragments of wood raining down. Caught between 2 angles of fire, the bikers scattered, giving Arya precious seconds to move. She dashed to a nearby stack of tires, pressing against the rubber as more bullets whizzed overhead. In the brief lull, she could hear the muffled cries of someone inside, likely a wounded deputy, or God forbid, the sheriff himself. The sound spurred her on. Roy, she rasped into her phone's walkie-talkie function. I'm going to flank them. Keep them busy. Roger that, came Roy's steady reply, punctuated by another series of gunshots. Adrenaline pumping, Arya slipped around the barn's perimeter, muzzle pointed downward as she advanced. She'd keep Stone's men pinned from all sides if she could. Hold on, Sheriff, she thought. We're coming. Inside the barn, the air was thick with dust and the acrid tang of gunpowder. Arya crept along the exterior wall, stepping gingerly to avoid loose planks. Gunfire echoed in bursts, the muzzle flashes flickering like lightning across the gloom. She spotted a shattered window, a potential entry point. From her crouched position, she tried to piece together the situation. At least 4 bikers had established a defensive position near the entrance. Roy's covering fire from the hayloft forced them to stay low, but they showed no signs of surrender. Deeper in the barn, she could make out movement, likely the pinned-down deputies. Arya eased toward the broken window, carefully lifting her rifle to peer inside. The interior was a maze of stacked hay bales, overhead beams, and the swirling haze of gun smoke. Sheriff Tate was hunched behind a wooden crate near the center, exchanging sporadic shots with a biker in a leather vest. Next to the sheriff, a deputy clutched his bloody shoulder. Another deputy lay unmoving nearby, leaving Arya uncertain if he was alive or not. Her gut churned at the sight. She had to do something, and fast. She radioed Roy again. "I see Tate, he's pinned in the middle. I'm going to draw these guys off so he can move." A quick copy crackled in her ear. She steeled herself, then hoisted her body through the broken window, shards of glass crunching underfoot. The barn's interior was lit by a single dangling lamp, casting long shadows that danced over the dusty floor. Staying low, she inched forward behind a bale of hay, scanning for the best angle. At the far side, one of the bikers barked orders to the others. He wore the same stylized viper patch on his vest, the lieutenant she'd seen in the surveillance footage. His posture bristled with aggression, and he carried his rifle with the casual confidence of someone who'd used it before. Arya steadied her breathing, taking aim. She fired once, the bullet slamming into the crate near the lieutenant's head. He dropped to his knees, swiveling his rifle in her direction. Before he could return fire, Roy's distant shots rained down from the loft window, forcing the man to dive for cover. "Sheriff, move!" Arya shouted, praying he could hear her over the chaos. Tate glanced in her direction, nodding weakly. Clutching his wounded deputy, he dragged the man behind a partition of hay bales. In the flickering light, she noticed Tate was bleeding from a graze along his forearm. He grimaced, but kept moving. Two more bikers attempted to cut off Tate's escape. Arya took them on with short, controlled bursts of gunfire, each shot forcing them back. One bullet caught a biker in the leg, toppling him with a howl. The other scrambled for better cover, reloading in a panic. Outside, she heard the roar of additional motorcycle engines. Reinforcements, perhaps. Her stomach nodded. How many men did Stone have on standby? She had to neutralize this group before the cavalry arrived. From above, Roy peppered the center of the barn with covering fire, hitting a row of overhead lights. Sparks flew, plunging the barn into partial darkness. Under the flicker of the single lamp, shadows elongated into twisted shapes. "Sheriff!" Arya barked, slipping through the bales and nearly tripping over a discarded pitchfork. "Head for the window on the west side. Roy and I will cover you." Tate hoisted the wounded deputy, hooking an arm around his shoulder. The man groaned but kept his feet moving. Meanwhile, the unmoving deputy remained out of reach on the floor. Arya's chest tightened, fearing the worst. With no time to check for a pulse, she pressed on. Amid the thunder of gunfire and the swirl of debris, Arya caught a glimpse of the lieutenant's furious eyes glaring at her from behind an overturned feed trough. This battle was far from over. She slammed her shoulder against a stack of crates for cover, reloading her rifle in swift, economical motions. "Roy," she hissed into her headset, "we need to wrap this up. More are coming." "On it," he replied. Then, in a grim undertone, "I see at least two more bikes pulling up outside." Arya clenched her jaw. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the situation spun completely out of control. Outside, engines rumbled like an oncoming storm. Arya heard raised voices amid the reverberation of boots on gravel. She glanced over her shoulder, realizing that the barn's front entrance was now swarming with new arrivals. Two bikers rushed in, guns at the ready, while another pair hung back, scanning for threats. The wounded deputy on the floor was in direct line of fire. "Sheriff!" she yelled, pointing toward the fallen officer. Tate caught her meaning, gritting his teeth as he set down the wounded man he was assisting. Arya peered through a gap in the hay, searching for a safe angle to retrieve the unconscious deputy. At that moment, one of the newly arrived bikers spotted her. He shouted something, an alert to his comrades, before leveling a shotgun in her direction. Arya dove behind a crate, feeling the splintering blast tear through the wood. Above her, Roy's rifle barked again. The biker with the shotgun staggered, clutching his shoulder where Roy's bullet had grazed him. Arya seized the opportunity, rolling into a crouch. With a swift pivot, she squeezed off two shots, striking the biker's weapon and sending it clattering to the ground. "Cover me, Roy," Arya shouted, then to Tate, "I'm grabbing the deputy." She bolted from her position, weaving around fallen crates and scattered debris. A barrage of bullets from Roy's vantage point kept the bikers pinned, but one managed a desperate shot in Arya's direction. It whizzed past her ear, narrowly missing. Her heart hammered, but she forced her legs to keep moving. Sliding to the deputy's side, she found him unconscious and bleeding from a chest wound. The entire front of his uniform was soaked. She quickly pressed 2 fingers to his neck. There was a faint pulse, but it was fading. "Hang on," she muttered, hooking her arms under his shoulders and dragging him backward. He was a heavy man, and Arya's muscles burned with the effort. A volley of bullets ricocheted off the ground mere feet away, sending up clouds of dust. Finally, she managed to haul him behind a partition of hay bales, where Sheriff Tate waited with the other wounded deputy. Tate's face was pale, a mixture of exhaustion and stress etched in every line. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he panted. Arya pressed a hand to the unconscious deputy's chest, attempting to staunch the bleeding. "He needs an ambulance, now." Tate grimaced. "We can't bring one in until the area is secure." She swallowed hard, glancing at the battered man in her arms. "Then we secure it," she said firmly. Roy's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Arya, I can't hold them much longer. They're spreading out, trying to flank me." Arya met Tate's gaze. "Sheriff, can you and your man get both wounded outside if Roy and I push the bikers back?" Tate checked the rounds in his service revolver. "We'll do our best." A burst of gunfire from the barn's entrance underscored the urgency of the moment. Arya locked eyes with Roy, who was partially visible in the rafters above. One nod, and they moved. Roy shifted his fire to the flank, preventing the bikers from surrounding him. Meanwhile, Arya sprinted across open ground, using piles of scattered equipment for cover. She needed to drive the bikers away from the barn's central quarter so Tate could evacuate his men. Snarling curses echoed off the barn walls. Another hail of bullets pelted the crates near Arya, splintering wood in a shower of jagged shards. She ducked, adrenaline pumping. With her rifle braced against her shoulder, she fired at the cluster of men trying to storm the center. One dropped, clutching a wounded leg. 2 more dove behind a stall, returning fire blindly. "Move, Sheriff!" she shouted. Over the cacophony, she heard Tate barking orders at his remaining deputy. They began hauling the unconscious officer toward the exit, leaving a trail of dark droplets on the dusty floor. Arya pressed forward. The gunshots thundered in her ears, and the gloom of the barn felt suffocating. But amid the chaos, her Delta Force instincts surfaced. She detached from the fear, focusing solely on angles, cover, and the next immediate threat. The bikers might have the numbers, but she had training, and the unshakable resolve to protect this town. Just outside the barn, the night air crackled with tension. Despite Roy's best efforts from the loft, several bikers managed to slip around the perimeter, aiming to ambush the retreating deputies. Through the shattered barn door, Arya caught sight of a figure moving in the shadows. A tall, broad-shouldered man armed with what looked like an assault rifle. "Sheriff, watch out!" Arya shouted, her voice echoing through the half-darkness. Tate was nearly to the exit, half carrying his wounded deputy and supporting the unconscious one. He pivoted just in time to see the armed biker stepping into his path. The man raised his rifle, but Roy fired from above, forcing the biker to dive for cover. Sensing an opening, Arya sprinted toward them. Her boots crunched over shattered wood and spilled grain. She slid to a stop beside the sheriff, taking up a defensive stance. "Get them out of here," she ordered, gesturing for Tate to continue. Behind them, the men inside the barn were regrouping, spurred on by furious shouts. Arya recognized the voice of the lieutenant she'd seen earlier. He was clearly in charge of this operation. If he organized another push, Tate and his men wouldn't stand a chance. "Roy," she called into her earpiece, "we've got to neutralize that lieutenant or they'll just keep coming." Overhead, Roy answered, "I see him. He's near the back wall, reloading, but I've got limited ammo left. We've got to do this quick." Nodding, Arya crept forward, using the barn's structural beams for cover. The lieutenant was barking orders to 2 other bikers, gesturing wildly. She lined up her rifle sights, exhaling slowly. One precise shot could change the tide. Before she could fire, however, a flash of movement caught her eye. Another biker, previously hidden, jumped down from the rafters behind Roy's position. Roy spun to face him, but not quickly enough. The biker tackled him, sending Roy's rifle clattering to the floor below. "Roy!" Arya shouted, her voice raw with alarm. The scuffle in the loft momentarily drew her aim, leaving the lieutenant unchallenged. He pivoted, spotted Arya, and unleashed a burst of gunfire. Bullets chewed through the beam, sending a rain of splinters down. Arya dove behind a pile of hay, wincing as fragments bit into her arms. Above, Roy wrestled the biker, their grunts and curses echoing. Arya couldn't see them, but she heard the unmistakable clang of metal as the two struggled near the edge of the loft. He can handle himself for a few seconds, she told herself, forcing her attention back to the immediate threat below. Peering around the hay, she aimed again for the lieutenant. He had moved, circling to flank her. Footsteps scuffed the dirt floor. Too close. Instinct took over. She spun, fired a single shot. The bullet caught one of the lieutenant's lackeys in the thigh, dropping him instantly. The lieutenant snarled, returning fire in a tight, controlled burst. Arya dropped prone, hugging the ground as her rounds whizzed overhead. Her heart pounded, adrenaline burning hot through her veins. She glanced up at the loft, desperate to see Roy's fate. A loud thud reverberated. Someone had fallen from the loft to the barn floor. The biker, presumably. He groaned, lying in a heap. Roy's voice crackled. "I'm okay. He's down." Relief flooded Arya, but she had no time to dwell on it. She rolled to a new position, ignoring the stinging in her arms. The lieutenant was now partially exposed, pinned between the collapsed crates and the barn's rear wall. "Lieutenant," she shouted, voice echoing, "drop your weapon and surrender." A mocking laugh came in reply. "You first." He fired wildly, forcing Arya to duck again. This man had no intention of surrendering. If she waited too long, more reinforcements could arrive, and the entire operation would spiral into a massacre. "Roy," she said into her mic, "we take him out now." She heard Roy grunt in affirmation. Together they shifted positions, Arya from the ground and Roy from the loft's edge. In a matter of seconds, they'd line up a perfect crossfire on the lieutenant. Arya felt a pang of remorse. She never relished killing, even in self-defense. But Stone's gang had drawn first blood, and this lieutenant had orchestrated an ambush that left multiple deputies bleeding on the floor. "No more casualties," she resolved, adjusting her grip. "This ends here." She exhaled, steadied her sights, and prepared to fire. Arya squeezed the trigger. In near simultaneity, Roy's rifle barked from above. The lieutenant's eyes went wide, realizing he was caught in a deadly crossfire. He tried to duck, but the combined shot struck his torso. With a ragged gasp, he staggered back, dropping his weapon as he slumped against the barn wall. Silence fell, broken only by the distant rumble of a few fleeing bikes outside. Clearly, some of the lower-level members had decided this firefight wasn't worth dying for. Arya exhaled, her limbs shaking from the rush. Roy climbed down from the loft, grimacing at a bruise forming around his jaw. He glanced at the fallen lieutenant, then back at Arya. "You all right?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Just some splinters." They rushed to the barn's entrance, where they found the wounded deputies. Sheriff Tate sat with his back against an overturned trough, applying pressure to one man's chest wound. A swirl of red and blue lights outside signaled that more law enforcement, or perhaps ambulances, had arrived. "We cleared the interior," Arya announced, kneeling beside the sheriff. "We have multiple wounded, some critical. Are you okay?" Tate nodded. "I'll live, but these men need medical care now. Where's that ambulance?" As if on cue, a paramedic stepped into the barn, face pale at the sight of carnage. "We've got stretchers outside," he said breathlessly. "Help us move them." Arya and Roy assisted the medics, carefully carrying out the wounded. In the chaos, the one deputy who had been unconscious earlier began coughing, a sign he was, at least, still alive. Relief coursed through Arya. Not everyone would walk away without scars, but they were breathing. Once the injured were in capable hands, Arya and Roy did a final sweep of the barn. Several bikers lay incapacitated, including the lieutenant, who was somehow still conscious. His eyes blazed with hatred, but his face was ashen. He clutched his bleeding side, refusing to speak. Sheriff Tate staggered over, calling for backup to cuff the survivors. "You two," he said, gesturing to Arya and Roy, "I owe you more than I can say. This ambush could have turned into a bloodbath." Still might, if Stone's out there regrouping, Roy responded. Tate's expression darkened. Yeah, we only got one chunk of the operation. Stone wasn't here. Arya's jaw tightened. She glanced at the injured lieutenant, recalling the overhead intel that Stone was ex-military. He wouldn't go down easily. We need to find out where Stone is, she said quietly. This raid was a trap for you. He must have known your timing. Tate nodded, shaking his head in frustration. My deputy was jumped last night. Must have let something slip, or at least they suspected we were coming. Roy surveyed the barn. So what now? Arya looked from Roy to Tate, her mind already churning with possibilities. Now we regroup. We still have a warehouse and a roadhouse to check. If Stone pulled out of here, he's got to be somewhere else. And that somewhere is probably better fortified than this barn. Tate's shoulders sagged, exhaustion etched into his face. I'll send a squad to the warehouse. Might take hours to mobilize after this mess. Arya stepped forward, face set in grim determination. No, we don't have hours. Stone's next move could be to punish this town for tonight's failure, or to vanish entirely. Let Roy and me scout the warehouse first. If we confirm Stone's presence, we'll call you in. The sheriff eyed her warily. You just survived one firefight. You sure you're up for another? Arya exchanged a knowing look with Roy. We'll manage, she said. A flicker of the old Delta Force steel glinted in her eyes. A deputy approached to help them gather the confiscated weapons. The lieutenant was carried out on a stretcher, still glaring but too weak to resist. Arya suspected he might have valuable intel on Stone's location once he recovered enough to speak. But that could be hours or even days away. And time was a luxury Kingsford did not have. They stepped out into the night, where fresh sirens blared and searchlights illuminated the battered remains of the barn. Blood stained the dirt, a grim reminder of how close this had come to total disaster. Arya inhaled a shaky breath. Stone was still out there, and she intended to find him before he unleashed even darker plans on her hometown. Word of the barn ambush spread rapidly through Kingsford. By the time Arya and Roy returned to the shooting range to regroup, the local radio stations were abuzz with reports of injured deputies in a violent firefight that left multiple suspects in custody. The rumor mill churned even faster, with townspeople growing increasingly anxious about Stone's next move. Arya parked her truck behind Roy's small cabin adjacent to the range, her muscles protesting every movement. She hadn't realized how sore she was until the immediate danger had passed. The adrenaline that had fueled her earlier had ebbed, leaving her exhausted and acutely aware of every bruise. Roy switched on the cabin's porch light, revealing a modest interior with mismatched furniture and a cluttered coffee table. Make yourself at home, he said gruffly. Arya sank onto a worn armchair, pressing a hand against a cut on her forearm. Thanks. Roy rummaged through a cabinet, pulling out a first aid kit. He tossed it on the coffee table, then leaned back against the wall, arms folded. We'll clean up those wounds. You mind telling me how you ended up with Delta Force training, then decided to settle in a quiet place like Kingsford? She managed a weary smile, shaking her head. Long story, I served multiple tours, saw more than I ever wanted to. When I got out, I craved normalcy, somewhere calm, quiet. I found this place on a map, rented a small house, and tried to blend in. Roy nodded, his gaze heavy with understanding. Sounds a lot like me after I left the Army. Ended up here teaching folks how to shoot targets instead of people. A moment of silence passed between them, a mutual recognition of scars that weren't just physical. Finally, Arya cleared her throat. We need to check out the warehouse on Route 17 and that roadhouse, the Rusted Spur. Stone is out there, planning his next move. Roy pulled a small map from his jacket pocket, unfolding it on the coffee table. This is the layout of the area, he said, tracing a finger over the highways and back roads. The warehouse is about 15 minutes outside town, near the old freight station. Not much traffic out there at night. Arya studied the map, recalling her earlier surveillance. If Stone wanted to hide a large stash of contraband or gather a bigger group of bikers, he could do it there without drawing much attention. Roy leaned in, and the Rusted Spur is even more remote. If he's regrouping after the barn fiasco, that might be where he goes next. The place has a big parking lot and a few service roads leading out into the woods. Two possible targets, Arya said, rubbing her temple. We can't cover them both at the same time. If we guess wrong, Stone slips away. Roy reached for a steaming thermos and poured them each a cup of coffee. The sheriff wants us to scout the warehouse first. My gut says Stone's men might be there, but I'm not so sure he will be. It's too obvious. Arya sipped the coffee, wincing at the bitter taste. Agreed. Stone is cunning. He'll assume we know about the warehouse. Maybe he left a small group there to throw us off while he moves the bulk of his operation to the roadhouse. Roy pressed his lips together. We could split up. Arya shook her head decisively. No way. We're already outnumbered. Dividing our forces is a bad call. Silence fell as they contemplated their next move. Eventually, Roy spoke again, voice low. You realize we might have to face Stone head-on. You sure you're ready for that? Arya set down her coffee, a steely glint in her eyes. I don't see another choice. He's threatened my patients, our sheriff, and this entire community. Hiding won't help anyone. Roy nodded in solemn agreement. Then let's gear up. If the sheriff and his men focus on the warehouse, we can quietly head to the Rusted Spur. If Stone's there, we'll confirm it and call for backup. They stood, a fresh wave of determination washing over them. The barn ambush had been harrowing, but the fight wasn't finished. Stone had evaded them once, and she refused to let him slip away again, especially if he planned to tighten his grip on Kingsford. A faint breeze ruffled the cabin's curtains as Arya examined her rifle for any sign of damage. Tomorrow they'd confront Stone on his own turf. The specter of another bloodbath loomed, but she pushed the fear aside. Her mission was clear. Protect the town she'd come to love at any cost. Dawn broke over Kingsford, painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds, an ironic contrast to the dread brewing among its residents. Phones buzzed with anxious messages, and the local paper's headline declared, Town in Crisis, Biker Gang Ambushes Sheriff's Raid. Arya skimmed the article online, noting how it praised an anonymous civilian for helping to save several deputies. She winced at the attention, relieved that her name hadn't surfaced. Publicity was the last thing she needed. She packed her gear in the early morning light, extra ammunition, the drone, and a medical kit. A pang of guilt struck her as she left a brief voicemail for Dr. Rosenberg, apologizing for missing her shift. Family emergency, she lied, hoping he'd understand. Someone had to face Stone head-on. Saving lives now might prevent far worse tragedies later. Roy pulled up to her place in his dusty truck, engine idling. Through the rolled-down window, he handed her a to-go cup of coffee. Figured you could use the boost, he said, forcing a half-smile. She took it gratefully, sipping the hot liquid. Thanks. Any news from the sheriff? He texted me an hour ago, Roy replied, voice tight. He's leading a team to the warehouse at noon. Hopes to catch Stone's men off guard. Arya exhaled. Then we head to the Rusted Spur, see if Stone took the bulk of his gang there. She hoisted her bag into the truck bed and climbed into the passenger seat, scanning the quiet street. A few neighbors peered curiously from their windows, but made no move to approach. She could almost taste the town's collective fear. Everyone knew the danger wasn't over. As Roy steered them onto the highway, Arya double-checked her gear. She found herself hyper-aware of every passing vehicle, half expecting a convoy of bikers to roar by at any moment. Tension thickened, coiling around her like a vice. 30 minutes later, they turned onto a narrow, cracked road leading to the Rusted Spur. Once a lively roadhouse, it had fallen into disrepair long before the current crisis. A faded sign with missing letters hung precariously over the boarded-up windows. Weeds poked through the asphalt of a once spacious parking lot. Roy cut the engine at the edge of a tree line. From behind a cluster of pines, they had a decent vantage of the roadhouse without being immediately visible. Arya reached for the drone, powering it on. She set it gently on the ground and used her phone to guide it into the sky. The small craft rose with a faint hum, the camera feed beaming to her screen. Anything? Roy asked, squinting at the display. Arya panned the drone's camera across the roadhouse roof, then down into the parking lot. At first, she saw nothing but peeling pavement and a few rusted cars that looked like they'd been abandoned for years. Then, near the back entrance, she spotted movement, a row of motorcycles parked beneath a broken awning. At least 5, possibly more. A black SUV with tinted windows sat nearby. That's more activity than an abandoned bar should have, Arya remarked. I see at least 2 men standing guard by the back door. No sign of Stone yet, but it's a good bet he's inside. Roy nodded grimly, and likely more men too, if they're posted up like that. Want me to circle around on foot? Let's both get closer, she decided. We can't waltz in guns blazing. We'll move in quietly, confirm Stone's presence, then call the sheriff. She landed the drone, tucking it safely back into its case. Together they checked their rifles, ensuring chambers were clear and safeties engaged while they maneuvered. If a firefight broke out, they wanted to be ready, but infiltration came first. Roy glanced at her, features etched in resolve. Ready, Sergeant? Arya's stomach twisted at the old title. She drew a slow breath, steeling herself. Ready as I'll ever be. With that, they slipped out of the truck and into the underbrush, hearts pounding in unison as they crept toward the rusted spur, a relic of bygone days that had become ground zero for Kingsford's next crisis. The midday sun filtered through the pine needles as Arya and Roy crept toward the rundown roadhouse. Each step was carefully placed to avoid snapping twigs. In the distance, a muffled rumble indicated more motorcycles might be arriving, or perhaps it was just a passing truck on the highway. They paused behind a dilapidated fence, scanning the building's perimeter. The two guards Arya had spotted from the drone feed remained stationed near the back door, occasionally exchanging terse comments. Both wore leather vests with the Black Viper's logo, sidearms holstered at their hips. A single rifle leaned against the wall, within quick reach. Roy leaned close, voice barely above a whisper. We could take them out quietly. But if Stone's got more men inside, they'll notice the missing sentries soon enough. Arya's gaze shifted to a narrow window near the building's foundation, likely an old basement vent. She pointed. Maybe I can slip in through there and do some recon from the inside. If I can confirm Stone's presence, we call the sheriff. Roy frowned. That's risky. If something goes wrong and I'm out here, I can't help you. She gave a half shrug, adrenaline spiking. I'm used to tight spaces. We can't just wait for Stone to make the next move. All right, Roy relented, but I'll circle around to the other side in case you need a diversion. Call out if you're in trouble. Arya clapped a hand on his shoulder in thanks, then began her careful approach. Keeping low, she moved around the roadhouse's rear, angling away from the guard's direct line of sight. An overgrown patch of weeds provided limited cover, prickly brambles tugging at her sleeves. Her heart pounded as she inched closer to the foundation window. If either guard glanced her way, she'd be an easy target. At last, she reached the rotting wooden frame. She gave it a gentle push, relieved when it shifted, hinges squeaking softly. It was a tight fit, but she wriggled through feet first, lowering herself into darkness. Her boots landed on dusty concrete, the stale smell of mildew filling her nostrils. She crouched, listening for any sign that her entry had been heard. Silence, aside from the faint hum of air ducts. She flicked on a small tactical flashlight, sweeping it over the cramped basement. It was cluttered with discarded furniture and boxes, but no immediate threats. She inched forward, mindful of the creaking floorboards overhead. A wooden staircase loomed in one corner, leading up to what she assumed was a storage room. She ascended slowly, each step a measured test of weight to avoid betraying her presence with a squeak. The door at the top was ajar, allowing a sliver of light to spill into the darkness. From beyond, she heard low voices, at least 3 men talking. Carefully, she peeked through the gap. The room was indeed a storage space, stacked with cases of beer and cleaning supplies. Through another open door, she glimpsed a main lounge area. Dusty tables and chairs suggested it hadn't been a functioning bar in quite some time. Her pulse quickened at the sight of Stone himself. He stood at the center of the lounge, pacing in agitation. A tall, muscular man with a shaved head, he wore a sleeveless vest displaying the largest Viper insignia Arya had seen yet. A visible scar ran across his forearm. In one hand, he clutched a handgun. In the other, a phone. He barked orders to 2 subordinates, cursing about the barn fiasco and traitors in the ranks. Arya's gut twisted. This is it. They had found Stone, the ex-military mastermind behind Kingsford's terror. Her heart hammered as she eased her phone from her pocket, intending to message Roy. But before she could type, Stone's voice rose, echoing through the dusty roadhouse. Pack up everything, he snarled at his men. We're moving out tonight. The warehouse is compromised, the barn is lost, and we've got a sniper problem to deal with. A chill ran through Arya. Stone's knowledge of her background, or at least her skill set, was disturbingly precise. She swallowed hard, adrenaline surging. If Stone mobilized his men tonight, they could spread out and disappear, leaving the town at their mercy whenever they chose to return. She tapped out a quick text to Roy. Stone is inside, planning to move out tonight. We have to call the Tate now. No sooner had she sent the message than a voice behind her said, "And who the hell are you?" Arya whirled, flashlight beam illuminating a biker who had wandered in from the hallway. His eyes widened at the sight of her, and his hands shot toward his waist. But Arya moved first, slamming the butt of her rifle into his wrist. The gun clattered away, and he stumbled back with a curse. "Intruder!" he yelled, voice echoing through the roadhouse. Instantly, chairs scraped, footsteps pounded. Stone's men rushed from the lounge, weapons raised. So much for stealth, Arya thought grimly, her heart hammering. She raised her rifle, bracing for the inevitable hail of bullets. Chaos erupted in the narrow storage room. Arya fired a warning shot into the ceiling, hoping to buy a second of confusion. It worked. The men hesitated, uncertain where the sniper was positioned. She used the moment to dart behind a stack of crates, pressing her back against the cold wood. Stone's furious voice rang out. "Don't just stand there, you idiots! Flush her out!" Multiple footsteps thundered in the hallway. She heard the scrape of furniture being pushed aside, the slam of a door. They were likely trying to cut off her escape route. "Roy, get in here," she silently pleaded, clutching her rifle. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She risked a glance, a text from Roy. "I hear the commotion, engaging the two guards outside. Hang tight." Relief flickered, but she remained acutely aware that she was alone in a cramped room against who knew how many armed bikers. The roar of gunfire sounded from outside. Roy must have opened up on the guards. That should keep more reinforcements from joining Stone inside. A biker in a tattered vest charged through the doorway, pistol raised. Arya took aim, firing a shot that struck the crate beside him, shattering wood shards. He dove to the floor, cursing, then scrambled backward under cover from one of his buddies who returned fire. The bullets tore through the crates around Arya, forcing her to duck. "It's just one person," someone yelled. "We can take her." Arya's chest tightened. The moment they realized she was alone, they'd swarm her with no mercy. She needed to reposition. Keeping her head low, she crawled behind a taller stack of crates. A bullet splintered the floor near her elbow, sending a puff of dust into the air. Her throat felt like sandpaper, adrenaline screaming through her veins. Stone's voice again, closer this time. "Pin her down. I want her alive, though. She's the sniper from the barn. Might be useful to us." A wave of cold horror swept over Arya. The last thing she wanted was to become Stone's bargaining chip. If captured, she'd be forced to reveal more about her tactics, or even be used against the town. Her jaw clenched. No way am I letting that happen. She took a deep breath, recalling her Delta Force training. Create a diversion. Regain the advantage. Quickly scanning the room, she spied a shelf of old, half-empty cleaning supplies, likely flammable. With careful aim, she fired at the bottles, the bullet puncturing a can of aerosol. A burst of foul-smelling liquid sprayed out, the sudden hiss startling the bikers. They retreated momentarily, shouting in alarm. Using that split second, Arya sprang to her feet and dove behind an overturned table, upending it for additional cover. Several bikers surged forward, but the slick floor slowed them down. She fired a controlled burst, grazing the leg of one assailant and forcing the others to scatter. Her mind raced. She couldn't hold this position forever. The roadhouse had multiple rooms. If Stone flanked her, she'd be trapped. A glimpse through the doorway showed Stone himself pacing near the lounge's bar, phone pressed to his ear. Was he calling for backup? Outside, the gunfire quieted for a moment, replaced by a dull thud. Roy must have handled the guards. Arya's heart leapt. If Roy broke through, he could help her corner Stone. She radioed Roy, voice tight. "I'm inside, pinned down in the storage room. Stone's here, calling for more men. Hurry!" Static crackled, then Roy's response. "On my way!" Arya reloaded swiftly, sweat beading on her forehead. Two more bikers advanced into the room, one with a shotgun, the other with a revolver. The muzzle flashes lit the cramped space in jagged bursts. She dropped to her knee and fired 3 rounds. One bullet found its mark, the shotgun-wielding biker collapsing with a cry. The revolver user ducked behind a metal rack, returning fire. Her ears rang, her arms trembled from recoil. She pressed herself against the overturned table, inhaling shaky breaths. Stay calm. Focus. The roadhouse was a death trap, but if Roy arrived soon, they might have a chance to corner Stone before he escaped. She heard Stone yelling orders again. Hold her off! Reinforcements are en route! A fresh surge of fear pulsed through her. If Stone's men arrived before Roy could help her, she'd be overwhelmed. Clenching her teeth, Arya braced for the next wave, determined to hold her ground. She'd come too far and sacrificed too much to let Stone walk away. A door slammed somewhere in the building, followed by rapid footsteps. Arya gritted her teeth, peeking over the rim of the table barricade. The biker with the revolver was creeping closer, taking advantage of partial cover behind a tall metal shelf. She locked her sights on his center mass and fired, the recoil jolting her shoulder. He crumpled to the floor, weapon skittering away. Arya! Roy's voice rang out from the hallway behind her. She twisted around to see him crouched by a shattered doorway. A dead biker lay at his feet, and smoke curled from Roy's rifle barrel. Relief coursed through her. Stone's in the lounge, she shouted, voice hoarse. He's calling for backup. Roy advanced, scanning for threats. Another biker lunged from the adjacent hallway, and Roy swung his rifle butt hard into the man's face. The biker toppled with a groan. Together they stepped into the main lounge. The old bar counter was littered with empty beer bottles and battered stools. Dust swirled in the broken sunlight streaming through boarded-up windows. At the far end, Stone stood, phone in one hand, handgun in the other. 2 of his men flanked him, both armed. They leveled their guns at Arya and Roy. Stone glowered, eyes burning with hatred. You, he spat. You're the sniper who wrecked my operation. Arya kept her rifle trained on him, fingers steady on the trigger. She could practically feel Roy at her side, mirroring her stance. Let the gun drop, she commanded. Stone let out a low laugh, gesturing to his men. Shoot them both. Time slowed. Arya squeezed the trigger as Stone's henchmen opened fire. Bullets seared past her ears. One grazed Roy's shoulder, drawing a hiss of pain. She dove behind a toppled booth table, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Roy ducked behind a chair, exchanging rounds with the second henchman. Stone darted behind the bar, taking cover. The air crackled with gunpowder and adrenaline. Arya's heart pounded as she reloaded, counting her remaining rounds. She was running low. End this fast. She rolled to a new angle, sighting along the edge of the booth. Stone's henchman lurched into view, half his face bloodied. Roy's shot must have clipped him, but he was still fighting. Arya fired once, then twice. The man collapsed, moaning. At the same instant, Roy's rifle jammed with a harsh click. Damn, he growled, ducking behind a table to clear it. From behind the bar, Stone popped up, handgun leveled at Arya's position. She flung herself sideways as he fired, the bullet splintering the wooden booth. She landed hard, pain jolting up her side. Gasping, she forced herself to lift her rifle. Stone's silhouette flickered behind the bar. Give it up, Stone, she yelled, voice echoing. Your men are down. The barn's gone. The warehouse is compromised. You're finished. Not by a long shot, Stone snarled back, popping off 2 more rounds. One chipped a chunk from Arya's cover, forcing her to hunch lower. A new set of headlights flashed through the boarded windows, tires screeching. A sense of dread twisted in Arya's gut. Were these Stone's reinforcements? Suddenly, the roadhouse doors burst open. Sheriff Tate and 3 deputies rushed in, guns raised. Freeze! Tate bellowed, his arms still in a sling but his revolver steady. Stone whipped around, caught off guard. In that instant, Arya seized her chance. She sprang to her feet, rifle aimed. Don't do it, she warned, voice trembling with intensity. Stone's finger tightened on the trigger, but he hesitated, surrounded now by Tate's men, Roy, and Arya. His murderous gaze flicked from one adversary to the next, realization dawning that escape was impossible. With a furious roar, he hurled his handgun across the floor. You'll regret this, he spat. 2 deputies rushed forward, wrestling him to the ground. Stone thrashed and cursed, but they held him fast, snapping cuffs onto his wrists. Roy exhaled a ragged breath, finally clearing the jam in his rifle. Tate limped over, pressing the muzzle of his revolver under Stone's chin. "Not another word," the sheriff growled. "You're under arrest." Arya lowered her rifle, her arms shaking. It was over. Stone's reign of terror had ended. The roadhouse fell silent except for the labored breathing of battered men. Stepping forward, Arya felt a swirl of relief, exhaustion, and sorrow for the lives lost. In that moment, she locked eyes with Sheriff Tate, who offered a respectful nod. Behind him, Roy clutched his bleeding shoulder, yet managed a weary grin. Kingsford's darkest chapter had been cut short, and Arya had played a pivotal role. She couldn't deny that the ghost of Staff Sergeant Fletcher still lived within her, protecting the innocent at any cost. And now, after all the gunfire and bloodshed, perhaps the town might finally reclaim its peace. In the aftermath of the final confrontation, Kingsford breathes a collective sigh of relief. Though scars remain, both physical and emotional, the town emerges stronger and more united than ever. Arya returns to her nursing duties, her secret now shared by those who witnessed her bravery. There's a renewed respect in the air, proof that quiet heroes can rise from the unlikeliest places. Sheriff Tate, grateful for the extraordinary help, vows to prevent any future threats from taking root in their peaceful corner of North Carolina. Roy carries a sense of pride, knowing he stood alongside Arya when it mattered most. From a personal standpoint, this journey reminds us that hope, courage, and determination are often hidden just beneath the surface of ordinary lives. Thank you for joining us in this adventure. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Let's discuss your favorite scenes, lessons learned, and any ideas for future stories. Your opinions truly keep this community thriving.